Good evening. My name is Abby Bass. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a librarian at the Seattle Public Library. We are thrilled and honored to be co-sponsors of this Clarion West series, Beyond Afrofuturism, Black Editors and Publishers in Speculative Fiction. Since tonight's presentation focuses in part on zines, I wanted to briefly mention the Zap Zine collection, which was donated to the library by Hugo House in 2017 and contains over 30,000 zines, mini comics, chapbooks, and other self-published and small press periodicals that were created in Seattle and beyond. It also includes a number of historically significant science fiction and fantasy zines. You can learn more about this collection on our website or by emailing zines@spl.org. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. These are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders, past and present, and thank them for their stewardship of this land. This event is supported by Seattle Writes, our free programs and workshops for writers, and the Seattle Public Library Foundation, whose generous support makes so many of our library programs possible. Thanks again to Clarion West for hosting this incredible series and sharing it with our local and national writing communities. And now over to you, Rashida.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rashida Smith, pronouns she, her, and I am with Clarion West. On behalf of Clarion West, I want to welcome you to the final in our three-part series, Beyond Afrofuturism, featuring Black editors in speculative fiction. As part of our mission to support emerging and underrepresented voices in the creation of wild and amazing worlds, these conversations are intended to expand our understanding of the role editors and publishers play in bringing new voices to the fore. The heart of speculative fiction are the many magazines and webzines. Whether it's taking the reins at established publications or creating new spaces that center marginalized communities, our guests tonight are doing what our field does best, pushing past the boundaries of what is to what could be, and exposing readers to fresh voices and visions in speculative fiction. Tonight's panel will be moderated by Arlie Sword. Arlie is the co-editor-in-chief at Fantasy Magazine, the senior editor at Locus Magazine, associate editor at both Lightspeed and Nightmare magazines, and a columnist for the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. He takes on multiple roles, including slush reader, movie and book reviewer, and interviewer at multiple venues, including Clark's World magazine and his own site, arliesword.com. Arlie grew up in England, Hawaii, and Colorado, and studied Asian religions at Pitzer College. He lives in Oakland and in non-pandemic times, usually writes in local coffee shops. He is a 2014 Odyssey Writing Workshop graduate. Thank you, Arlie.
Thank you, Rashida. I appreciate that. I have with me some awesome people that y'all need to get to know. Craig Lawrence Gidney is the co-editor of Baffling Magazine and the author of A Spectral Hue, a novel, and the collections See, Swallow Me, and Skin Deep Magic. He's a 3-time Lambda Literary Award finalist who lives in his native Washington, D.C. I also have with me Lashon M. Wanek. She is the editor of the online magazine Giganotosaurus. She's also a writer of speculative fiction, a book reviewer for Lightspeed, and can be found on Twitter at T-Bone Jenkins. I also have Ebony J. Dunbar. She is the managing editor of Faya Literary Magazine and a writer of speculative fiction. You can find out more about her work at her website, ebonydunbar.com. Brent Lambert is social media manager for Faya Literary Magazine and senior programming coordinator for FayaCon, which y'all need to sign up for if you haven't yet. He can be found on Twitter at Brent C. Lambert and on his website, brentclambert.com. Chinelo Onwalu is the nonfiction editor of Anathema, Spec Fic from the Margins, and co-founder of Omenana, a magazine of African speculative fiction. She's from Nigeria, but lives in Toronto with her partner and child. So, I mean, these are some folks that if you don't already know, I definitely recommend you check out their work, go to their sites, and see what they're up to. So today we're talking about zines and magazines, expanding worlds in speculative fiction. Let's get right into it. So here's the thing. We're all here. We've all been gathered up here. And for many of us, we've been on similar panels talking about similar conversations at conventions or other events. So my question is this, we tend to get called together to talk about these particular topics. We don't tend to get called together to talk about plot or character development or anything like that. If this were a group of white panelists, we would be talking about, our favorite science fiction books or, how do you structure your novel? So the question is, are these conversations helpful? Are they still necessary? Or is it a type of ghettoization where we're given a platform to speak about identity, but not to simply stand as experts in writing, craft, or the field and so on? What do y'all think? Don't make me call on you.
I guess I'll go on this one.
Brent.
I'll dive in first.
Yeah.
So, fair warning, I'm a Libra, so I see things on both sides here. So I'll just give that clarification. But as part of, I guess I can speak to FireCon. As part of FireCon, one of the things we wanted to address in programming was exactly that. Like, we wanted to give space to people that don't normally get to talk about craft and the things that are fun and exciting about writing, the chance to do that, right? Like, there's so many talented Black writers, but you ask someone like P. Shelley Clark to always talk about identity. Like, no, this man is, the way he structures novels and the way he structures character, the way he structures stories. Why aren't we talking about that? Or why don't we get Nora Jemisin more to talk about world building? The things that every writer could learn from them. So on the one hand, I totally think that there's not enough space for us to get to talk about those things. On the other hand, unfortunately, we're dealing with a lot of people who just can't seem to get past 101. And unfortunately, in order to make the whole train move, we got to move these back cars too. And there's so many people who we can't seem to get them past the basic 101 stuff of acknowledging, like, our voices matter. This is why. And it seems like I don't know. Sometimes it feels like that scene in World War Z where they're like trying to get all the zombies off the wall. That's what it feels like, trying to educate white people sometimes about like our issues. It's just like, back up. Like, we're trying to see us as people. But yeah. So I think there's value in both, but I think it is unfortunately, it is an unfair burden on us that we have to do this kind of work, and it takes away from our creativity and our time to just flourish. White writers don't have to worry about these things. They can just go write as many drafts of their story as they want. We first have to convince you that our draft even has a purpose, that it could even matter in the first place. So yeah, I guess I don't know if that answers the question, but it's a little bit of both for me.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that?
I can add.
So, yeah, Ebony.
Yeah, I agree with Brent wholeheartedly. It is this very awkward position, right? Of like, I would love to be able to say that we don't need things like this anymore, and people will just figure it out and like do their own learning and Google and, read some books and learn. But if it hasn't happened in the last year, in the last 10 years, in the last 20 years, I don't know how long it'll be before this actually does become an obsolete feature of panels and conventions, because people are just, the word I'm going to use is slow to change. That's the phrase I'm going to use, but it's probably worse than that. I'm trying to be give some grace to my fellow man. But it's an unfortunate thing to need something like this when I know I can look back, right, and say, oh, so-and-so was on that panel answering the same question, talking about these same things 6 months ago, a year ago. Like, it just continues and continues. And I would love to be talking about, Brent actually moderated this amazing panel not that long ago where we were talking about epic fantasy. We were all Black writers and we didn't talk about being Black the entire time. There was one thing I think that came up and it was like, this is incredible. Why aren't we in more of these conversations where we can just talk about what it means to write the work we're writing instead of what it means to be who we are, just trying to write?
I actually have a rule when people call me on panels, do not ask me about Afrofuturism. Like, if the conversation circles around to it, great, but do not use that. Don't ask me to define Afrofuturism. Don't ask me to be like, to say, like, I'm so tired of telling, like, how did you get into this? Not, and not in a way of like curiosity, but more like, how did you get it? I mean, you like what the hell? Like how the hell did you get into this? And so I agree. I completely agree. I think that there is some education to be, dispensed, but I'm tired of having to be the one to do it. I mean, Africans have been writing, speculative fiction since the dawn of time. And even like the current boom of speculative fiction, it's been 10 years now, like 10, 15 years of this stuff. So, I'm still reading articles that are talking about the rise of like discovering, us. And I'm just like, there's this colonialist attitude about, the river was there before you showed up, but it didn't exist until you saw it. So so I try to push back on that a little bit, but at the same time, my identity is incredibly important to me. The journey into my own Blackness has been hard won, and I am reluctant to sort of sweep that aside to then be considered a writer like everybody else, because I'm not a writer like everybody else. My journey has been very, very different, and I don't want that to be swept aside or minimized. I want that to be acknowledged. I just don't want that to be the full sense of all that anybody has to say or see of me. So it would be nice if I could just sort of like acknowledge that, yes, I'm a Black writer. It informs my writing. It is the core of who I am. It's the core of why I write. And then move the fuck on. Excuse me. To talk about other things, like
yeah. How do we get to that place where where we walk into a random panel at a Worldcon and see a panel full of BIPOC authors or Black authors, and the discussion is not about identity, but it's about, like Brent said, it's a discussion about our favorite fantasy tropes or whatever. And yet there's still that room to be Black. There's still space to feel that Blackness, but it's on a venue like a Worldcon or something like that. How do we get there?
I feel like, no, you go ahead, Lashon.
No, I was going to say that actually should not be up to us. It should be up to the people organizing the event. So Worldcons and basically science fiction cons in general should be aware of their panelists, and especially, well, not just of, the Black panelists, but BIPOC and queer overall. They need to be aware and use them in a way that utilizes all of their gifts and all of the things that they want to celebrate. So it's on them. And it has been done. It's obviously been done. There needs to be better administrative methods of doing so. And it's I'm not a conference organizer, but but I am an administrator. I do that as my day job. And it's like, come on, you got to have like written down instructions somewhere so you guys don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over and over and over again, So maybe there needs to be like a con for con runners or something where they can get together and.
There is one.
There is?
Yeah, there is one. So continue. There actually is one. Yeah.
I did not know that. Okay, well, that's where they need to discuss. And they need to discuss it and put those plans in action. Simple. So.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to add to that or speak to it?
Yeah, I could definitely speak to it. So, I mean, I'm definitely not one to brag, but we were able to pull off in 4 months what some of these cons have struggled to do for decades. And I'm not gonna say it was perfect because nothing, nothing's perfect. Things happen, but to me, at least after my first year of experiencing that, I just realized the baseline of giving a damn about the people isn't there at most of these cons. Like the fact that, okay, if I'm a Black artist and I get nominated for an award, I gotta pay for my own ticket to get my own award. Now that's on top of if it's a Black writer on the continent. So now they got to worry about the visa and they got to worry about paying for the show up. So it's most of these cons have not even broken past the line of giving a crap about the writers that they claim that they want to show up more. So it's like, if you're lacking basic empathy and actually not even engaging with, because there's been plenty of Black writers who have expressed exactly what they would like to see at cons, exactly the ways they don't feel welcome at cons, the way that they would like to see these spaces actually show up for them. And it's like, it goes in one ear and out the other over and over again. And it's almost insidious the way that they get away with acting like they don't know or they don't understand. Like, I mean, I know I'm nominated for one, but whatever. So, so like Worldcon, for instance, like how can you possibly expect there to be any change when you're basically changing the entire leadership structure every single year? Like there's not going to be any room for growth or any room for improvement or taking on understandings. And they can always fall back on the, oh, we're just volunteers. This is our first year, so we don't really know what's going on. And Black writers get thrown under the bus again and again and again. So I think what you have to do, you have to establish a continuity of leadership, and that leadership has to actually care about Black writers across the globe, not just American Black writers, not just Canadian Black writers, but across the globe, because that is something the industry just fails at completely. We forget Black writers in the global South constantly, and and it seems like a big hurdle. So I don't know if I see that happening anytime soon, but because the hurdle isn't the work. The hurdle is the willingness to do the work. And I think that's the biggest problem.
Yeah.
I would add. Sorry, go on.
Oh, no. All I was going to say is that a lot of these cons, it's sort of baked into the entire structure of it to the point that, I mean, forget about issues about racism. They're dealing with issues about sexual harassment, and sexual harassers still continue to show up, even though they have rules. So there's something about the con. I just wanted to echo what he said about it being insidious, that there is something about that.
I think I agree that it is a basic lack of just not caring. There have been so many cons that I've been invited to, and then when I bring up some of these issues, there's just like, well, sorry, like so the clear thing was that they wanted to be seen doing it, but not actually doing the work. And I think that is the nature of white supremacy, especially white supremacy in the day and age that we're in, where it pays to look like you're it pays to look woke. It pays more to look like you're doing the work than to actually do the work. And so I think a lot of these spaces are hoping that if they just say the right things, big, vague, hand wavy gestures towards maybe doing the right thing, they'll get their ally cookie and then they can go home and sleep. Like, if you're asking them to actually change things, to actually think things through, to actually like make the effort, then that's where you get the pushback. That's where you get the big blow up. I think, was it Worldcon where I think it was Tempest Bradford, I think, who had this whole long email chain with this woman who eventually started crying some white woman tears, and it was just, it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. But that's exactly what we're working against. There is just not the willingness to change, because making that effort means giving up some bit of power, some bit of shifting the structure, and white supremacy just don't want to do that. So we're just out here saying the same things over and over again, but it's the same systematic mess that we're dealing with in every other part of our lives, right?
Yeah. Chinello, you can expect me to use ally cookie. You can expect to hear me use that at some point. I'm taking that. That's now mine. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I love that. Let's get into some other topics, because we could definitely talk cons all day. So how did y'all get started in the industry? How did you land a gig as an editor? And do you feel like your identity or identities, whatever those are, played into this journey in any particular way, or did it not really matter? Craig, why don't we start with you, because you haven't talked a lot.
Okay. I was actually just asked by Dave Ring, who lives in DC, if I would join in with this particular project. And I just sort of fell into it. I don't actually think that, I think the one thing is both of us want to show marginalized authors and things like that, but we don't necessarily want to trumpet it. We just want it to be the baseline. So we all sort of look into the background of the author and seeing where they come from and all that sort of thing. We're primarily, it doesn't really seem to, because I think Dave and I are so close in terms of what we do, that we're kind of on the same sort of page. I think I like more flowery stuff than he does, but that's about all that is. It doesn't have to do with, both of us are really committed to getting, marginalized voices in front of people's eyes.
I can go next. Oh, yeah, I can. Huh?
Nice.
Uh-oh, he is frozen. Yeah.
Go ahead, Lashon.
Okay.
Nice.
For me, I got my gig because I was asked by, so before I worked with Giganotosaurus, I actually was associate editor for Podcastle, which that was my first editing gig, and that was the editors at the time was co-led by Anna Schwinn and Dave Thompson, and so they had brought me on, and basically that's how I learned how to do editing skills. And Anna Schwinn contacted me back in 2019. It was like, hey, Ann Leckie is looking for a new editor. I would like to suggest you. And I was like, really? And she's like, oh yeah, I think you will be perfect. And it's like, yeah. And it just so happened that, it's like, I was at the point in my life where it's like, I could actually take that on. So I was like, let's see, what do I have to do? And they were like, well, it's only one story per month. You pick it and you publish it. And I was like, I'm down with that. So, so it's great because I just find a story that I like and I publish it, and it's a lot of fun, and it was. I don't know. I don't think. Does my identity play into that? Part of it may have been, but if so, it's like I was more that I had more to feel that Anna and Lucky, they trusted my skills. So it's like they know that they knew what I liked, and they were like, let's have her. And I was like, okay. So yeah.
Nice. What about y'all? Janella, you started a magazine.
That's a very loose. Yeah, well, I happen to be I happen to be friends with someone who had a lot more drive and focus than I did, and so in 2014, Mazi and I had been talking about this for a while, and finally, I think in 2014, he was like, "All right, I'm doing this," and I was like, "Okay," and I jumped on board, and it kind of happened the same way with Anathema. Michael, my partner, and their friend and our friend Andrew were like, we want to do a thing. And Chanel, are you a bonder? I was like, okay, and I jumped on board. And so, the way I got into the editing gig though was I started out as a reporter. After I went to journalism school and I started out as a reporter, and then I think one night something big happened, and instead of sending me out to like report on it, they were like, just come back and be here and edit as things come in. So I don't think I was a very good reporter. I don't know that people get pulled off their beats and are like, just sit down. It's okay. No. Just be back here with us. And I kind of got in that way. I moved from, newspapers to publishing, and then and now I do freelance. And so it turns out that I had a bit of a talent for it. I am very good at like looking at things and seeing how I can make those things better. The lesson I've had to learn as an editor is to not do that in my voice, but to try and find how to do it best in the voice that I'm, that the person is in. And so it's been an interesting journey in that sense. In terms of the way my identity plays into it, I think the biggest part of it was when I was at Ominana. What I wanted to do was to bring people who hadn't necessarily had a shot anywhere else, people whose writing might, within like a more westernized structure, people whose writing would have been looked at and said, you don't write very well. But you're talking about, people for whom English is a second language, right? For whom, like, we have a very different like storytelling sense. Like, it's a more oral, it's much more like circular, it's less, ending, beginning, bop, 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 bop. And so trying to sort of bring that into a place of balance where it could still be read and appreciated by Western audiences, but still true to itself. That's been really important to me. And so even now at Anathema, I'm still brought on to sort of edit, African voices and voices of like, Black authors who are coming out of that tradition. And so I think in that sense, that's where my identity has come in. But in terms of the work that I do, it's just been about making sure that everyone gets to be read in the best possible version of themselves. Yeah.
Major, that's huge though. Yeah. What about the Fire crew?
I guess since I'm the senior, I'll go first, Ebony. Yeah, identity definitely played into it. I'll just say that up front. The whole reason we started the magazine was because we saw blatant numbers and data at the time. I think it was the POB report at the time just showed blatant numbers that showed the discrepancies of how poorly most magazines at the time were publishing Black people in terms of like numbers and whatnot. And also, it was sparked by a bit of spite in seeing the way that some of these magazines, won't name names, but some of these magazines push back against the data and was like, oh, well, it's because we choose the best, or we're colorblind. We don't think about color. Or we don't have these perspectives, right? Like very aggressively pushing back against this. So we were like, okay, fine, we'll do our own thing. So out of all that little simmering anger came fire. And I started off doing slush with them for a little bit until I had to really transition to just focus on social media. Yeah, and then from there, last year was when I kind of, me and Devon got approached by Tor to do a project with them. And we kind of did the Brief Fire anthology, which was something I'm actually really proud of. It came out really great. And then because of FireCon, Escape Pod hit me up and was like, "Hey, you want to do a guest issue with us?" So doing that now. So most of my, I mean, and you know what? I know sometimes like the white structure makes you want to feel bad about saying that stuff came about because of your identity, but it's like, yes, it came about because of my identity, but also because I work my ass off. So the two things can exist at the exact same time. And yeah, so that's kind of how I landed into this spot.
Nice.
I started editing at Podcastle 2, actually, when just as Kalita was leaving, and Jen is still there, obviously. But I started doing that probably because somebody in the FIA crew was like, hey, there's an opportunity here, which to me says like, it's a little bit identity based. I think they were losing a Black slush reader at that time. And so they were looking for someone else with that identity background. And I was like, okay, sure, why not? I've never done this before. I'll try it out. And that was an awesome experience, a good place to be learning when there are so many stories to read. I think you just have the opportunity to better understand what it actually means to be an editor. And then I was approached by the FIA team and asked to come read slush for them as well. And I was very happy to do that, excited. I'm always excited to push FIA to the forefront. And then, yeah, I think I was working for a year before we started. I moved into this sort of managing editor place, which is this lovely mixed place of being able to read slush, not being fully responsible for picking what goes in the magazine. So I don't feel as much pressure as I'm sure Devon feels, but still getting to get a little bit further up in the editing game.
Nice. It sounds like everybody kind of has a different path, a different way to get where they got. That's what it sounds like to me. My path was different too. So for people who want to get into the editing side of things, what do you all think is the best way for them to go about it? And is it any different for BIPOC people than it is for white people?
I'll say that I think this is one of those times when who you know is probably really important, right? Like I feel like that's the one kind of recurring thing that I have been hearing, right? Is like you build that relationship, you start building that community, and it eventually could turn into something, or someone thinks of you when they are thinking about, oh, someone said they needed an editor for this, or they needed a new slush reader, and that's the way to do it. And I think the funny thing about like networking or community building is that you kind of have to do it when you don't want to be doing anything, right? Like when you're not looking to get into editing is the time to be making friends with a whole bunch of different people from various positions, and then you just don't know what will turn into something along the way. But maintaining those relationships and growing those relationships is what, at least to me, feels like it's the thing that can set you on that editing path.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that or expand on it or say anything different?
Well, just to kind of, I guess, something I was thinking about as you asked the question is that I think it is different for BIPOC people who want to come into this, because we have to be a lot more discerning of the opportunities that people try to present us. I mean, we saw it last year. Anytime there was a moment of unrest, all of a sudden every agent's inbox is open, every editor wants to talk to you, everybody wants to make offers to read your pages. And so, like, be careful, I guess would be my advice. Be careful and make sure that they are actually doing it from a genuine place and not so that they can feel good about themselves and ghost you in 2 months once the next thing happens. And I think that's something that we have to consider, that white people who want to get into editing don't necessarily have to consider. Like, there's so many people who want to have an ally cookie. I want to steal it too. Have an ally cookie. and, you know, they want to munch on the ally cookie, but they don't want to actually like do anything for you. They just want the cookie. So be concerned about who tries to give you these opportunities, and just, you know, I will also say too, you gotta, I think for BIPOC people who want to try to be part of this, you have to have a spirit of community. Like, I think, unfortunately, there's just not enough of us, and for better or worse, we kind of have to, you know, look out for each other. And I think, you know, you just got to have that kind of that spirit of community and be, you know, not naive, not, you know, not gullible, but just be open to building that community with other people.
Right. I think I want to just hazard a guess, but I feel like what you're talking about, that spirit of community, also ties into what you're talking about when you say be careful, because you can tap in with other people in the community about people who are giving you offers, right?
Yeah, and what I would say, I guess the quick little add to that too is, I'm probably going to ruffle some feathers, but whatever. Just because a white person might share your marginalization, do not think that they are your friend in this industry, because there are quite a few people who they will use that, and they will use you. So yeah, be careful who you build with. I'm glad you pointed that out, Artie. Yeah.
Does anybody else want to add to any of this?
Yeah, I would definitely second the there's a lot of opportunists out there right now, and it can be quite dazzling when you're approached, you know, by someone and you're like, ooh, you heard of me, you okay, all right, but you gotta dig deeper, you gotta ask. And for me, always trusting your gut, because you know when white people are feeding you nonsense. Like, if you've grown up Black in the world, you know when white people are just being, you know, like blowing smoke up your butt. And so, you know, listen to that voice when that comes up. I think that one thing with being a, you know, a BIPOC editor or a Black editor in particular is that there is a tendency to want to ghettoize you and say that you can only read writing of other Black people. You know, there's a sense that, you know, white people can read everybody, but Black people can only read other Black people. And that's a big media thing. And so while it's super important that Black writers have access to Black editors, because we do, I think, bring really important perspective to the work, and we do judge the work by, I think, different standards in some ways. I think that it's important not to allow yourself to become, you know, pigeonholed. I think that, you know, and for me, the way I've been able to kind of get around that is by editing outside of the publishing industry. So I have a background in editing for, you know, nonprofits, and there is another kind of sort of ghettoization in that, but it does allow me to expand my repertoire and like wear different editorial hats. So sometimes what happens is that people outside the publishing industry are much more appreciative of the editorial skills that you're going to bring, and they're much more willing to pay you really well for those skills. So don't be afraid to like go outside of outside of the industry to edit, in different places. There's nothing wrong with commercial editing. Rent needs to be paid. People need, we need to buy groceries. So don't let anybody try to like tell you that like, oh, if you're editing, for a technical trade magazine, you're somehow doing less important work. That's nonsense.
Right. That's a really good point. And I feel like that whole you're supposed to starve for your art thing is especially applied to BIPOC and Black people. Does anybody else want to add to this or say anything else about it? Talk about how to get into editing. What is your editorial process like? How do you go through submissions? Do you read each one in entirety? Do you reject early? Are there some common reasons why you reject a lot of work? Yeah.
Well, I'll go. What I do is that since we do flash fiction, I read the entire thing, and I sometimes read it twice or three times to figure out what's going on with it. And I also feel like as a BIPOC editor, that when I get something that comes from a voice that's not heard, a marginalized voice or another BIPOC author, I kind of want to treat them with a little, if they're almost there, I will send back a R&R, that sort of thing. And because I think it's important to sort of the editorial world that we grew up in. I grew up in the world of fantasy and science fiction, the big three magazines, and they tended to be really New York editory and kind of mean. And I just don't see myself as being that particular way. And I don't really see the value in that. I mean, obviously, if we get tons of a deluge of stuff, we'll have to send out form letters. But there is something about just sort of, I can tell on the first page, I'm just throwing it away. And there's a lot of different ways of telling stories that, we specialize in queer stories. And there are ways in which those stories unfold, or stories that don't come from the US, the way that they unfold, that you have to be sensitive to.
Right. Anybody else want to speak to this?
So I'm on the opposite end. Our magazine accepts between 5,000 and 25,000 words. So basically novella size. So our reading time is a little bit longer. I actually have a team of slush readers who basically they go through, and then we actually have another person who makes a second pass, and basically they send stuff that is readable up to me. What I do is I actually take time to actually sit down and read the stories. So I read it all the way through from end, and there's a few that I will actually read a couple, 2 to 3 times. So I like to sit and think about things, which is why we have such a long query time. If it's passed up to me and I have your story for a really long time, that means I'm thinking about it. So, for the most part, the stories that I do send back, that I do reject, I actually do take time to actually say why. I try to take time to say why it's not working for me. Sometimes though, I just can't find anything. It's like, sometimes it's just not working. It's just not working. And it's you feel bad about that, because like usually those stories are, they're okay. They're just not catching me. And it's like, it's not a story where it's like, you did everything right. It's just not for me. And so I will release it to give it to, someone else, to give it a try. And yeah, it's a long process, but like at the same time, sometimes though there are stories that are almost there, and those are the stories that make me excited, because then I can say, if you do this and if you did this, resubmit it, I may pick it up. And the ones that have come back to me, it's like, I love it, let's print it, and there you go.
Nice.
I actually do the thing where because for me, my editorial, when I pick a story, it's entirely subjective. There's no like objective, like, okay, if you hit this and this note, then I will publish your story. It's entirely, how does that story make me feel? Did I feel like reading to the end? Did I read the first page and want to know more? So it's entirely emotional. So I can't tell people like, okay, if you just write this exact kind of story, this will appeal to me. And if it's not appealing to me within the first couple of pages, I have a hard time trying to like force myself into like reading the rest of it. And I know that that might mean that, some stories that are written in like slightly different ways might suffer for it. But I have to publish the stories that I enjoy. And if I'm reading it and I'm struggling through the beginning, maybe it gets better in the end. But then my advice becomes work on that beginning so that it's a little bit more interesting, at least to me. Or maybe I'm not the person to do it. Maybe another editor who has that sort of patience and who can get through it will appreciate it. I feel like, I think there was another panel where I said, I think editing is like dating. Like, sometimes you meet, you have coffee, you talk. It was nice. It was okay. But there wasn't that spark, there wasn't that connection, that thing. And that's what I'm always looking for, is that like, ooh, and when I get to the end, did you make me go, ooh, did you make me go, ooh, okay. Like take a deep breath, like, okay, we went on this journey and that was a good journey. That was fun. I want to do that again. So yeah, my process, we don't have slush readers in either of the magazines I've worked for. It's been all me. I did get a slush reader for a minute now, but I still ended up reading everything because she'd read it and I trusted her judgment, but I was also like, but what if? And and because it's entirely subjective, I couldn't always just say, okay, yes, you will have exactly the same reaction to a story that I will. That's just not a thing. And things that she liked and things that I didn't necessarily work for me, and things that worked for me, she didn't necessarily work for her. But it was nice because I got to have a different perspective on things where I was like, okay, I can see why somebody who isn't me would like this piece as well. So yeah, my process is entirely unscientific. It's simply, does this move me? Do I like it? Do I want to read it to the end? And do I want to read it again? Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah. What about the FIA crew?
Yeah, with FIA, we do have a team of slush readers, and so they're making a first pass over everything, and we do give feedback to just about every piece that comes through. They're like, it's very limited cases. If you didn't send us speculative fiction, we're not giving you notes on that. If you didn't do the guidelines, the like basic bare level of the guidelines, we're not giving you notes on that. But pretty much anything else, we really strive to be a place where new writers, as well as writers who have been in the game for a long time, feel like they can get support, as well as some place to publish their work. So we are always sending people feedback. I know it's hard at having been a first reader and knowing all of my first readers right now, that it is very hard when you come up against that story that you're like, I think I like this, but I don't know that I would move this up to our executive editor to read. And I, like we always are saying, right? What you want to send forward is the thing you would advocate for. If you wouldn't sit down and like say, this really needs to be in the magazine and here's why it does this and it did that and I felt like this, don't send it up, because if you're not excited about it, we're not going to be excited about it. And that we don't want that to be in the magazine, which doesn't always mean that something isn't written really well and doesn't always mean that it's not a great story. To Lashon's point, right? Like send it out to be accepted somewhere else, because we might just not be the right place. And to Chanel's point, it is super subjective, right? We have 4/editors, 3/editors on a good day. And so depending on who gets your piece, they might really enjoy it. They might not. If somebody else came behind and read it, they might like it more. We give folks the option to say, someone else should read this because it's not for me, but I can see all of the things it's doing well. And I need that second opinion on like, should this be in the magazine? But sometimes it just didn't ping. And that's okay. It doesn't have to. And then obviously it moves up to Devon and he makes his second choice, but we're reading everything. And I think sometimes people feel like, yeah, they're like, oh, you're just reading that half page and not going any further, or your notes don't make sense, or you said this wasn't speculative. And it's like, well, we do read it. We read every word. So if we didn't see a speculative element, or we said that we gave you some feedback, take that with the love with which we meant it and go off and figure out what you want to do with it next. I think sometimes it's hard for folks to get that feedback that like, oh, you didn't think this was speculative, or oh, you didn't see my character's motivations on the page. Somebody else might see them. We just didn't.
Yeah. Brent.
I was just going. I was actually going to love a little bit on Ebony and the rest of the crew. So when we started the whole feedback thing, like for every single person, that was like a huge decision, just because we knew at the time, at least, like Black writers don't typically get that kind of feedback. Like they get the form rejection, or they get the, oh, I couldn't connect to the voice. Oh, I couldn't, or or it just didn't work for me. And so we just strongly felt like, okay, let's at least give Black writers at least one place that they know that they can get something and they can work from there. And I've had many people like DM me and like message me. It's like, oh, that was so great. That helped me like, improve the story and sell it someplace else, or, actually helped me realize a weak point in my writing just overall. And I never got that feedback from anybody before. So I think sometimes it's easy to assume that every writer has a community, when there's actually a lot of writers working in very solitary places and they never get feedback and they never have anybody engage with their work. So I love the fact that Ebony and them still keep that practice up. And yeah, I think to me at least, it's one of the highlights of the magazine is that we do give that service to Black writers.
Cool. We're almost out of time and I have like 20 more questions. I've only asked like 3. And so we really need 2 or 3 more hours. But so I'm going to ask one more of my questions, and then I have a few questions from the audience. So we'll go to those. So my last question of my 20 questions is going to be, how can editors create space for BIPOC voices? What are the things that you do, and what are the things that other editors can do?
I think one of the things I think a lot about is opening your mind to the different structures, right? Like I am an American writer. I am used to this like Eurocentric way of a story being told, to Janelle's earlier point, right? Beginning, middle, end. And I had an epiphany reading a novel a while ago that I was like, oh, this is written so well. It just isn't written in a way I'm used to. And I have to get over that hurdle, as opposed to telling that writer, they're like, oh, this isn't working for me, or there's something wrong with this. And I think that's a thing most editors could spend some time doing, is just questioning that voice in your head and saying, like, is it that I don't understand the way this is written, or that the shape of this doesn't actually work, or is it about something I've internalized as this is the right way, and it may not be the right way. It just is a way to tell this story. And I think that's something everyone can do, regardless of your background or what you're reading or whatever. I think that's useful to just spend a little bit of time questioning yourself or pushing yourself on that. Sometimes the answer is no, the story just doesn't work, or this book just doesn't work. But sometimes it's just me. I didn't get it. And that's on me and not on the writer.
Anybody else?
I'll keep it quick. Just be intentional. I think be intentional about what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it and who you want to include and what steps you need to do to get there.
I would also add that if you're a white editor and every single person on there is of one hue or one gender, you've done something wrong. And you really do have to go out, and it might feel uncomfortable because the entire society is saying, oh, we don't see color, but you have to do it anyway. And you just have to, grind your teeth and just go ahead and ask.
Basically, go on.
Oh, no.
I was just going to say, diversify your slush readers. The people, particularly the people who are that first point of contact. Diversify your slush readers. That's all.
I would echo what's already been said, because, and I would stress that you need to know that you are biased. Like, don't go into this thinking, I'm good, I'm sure that I'm doing I'm sure, like, don't go into this with the confidence that you're doing it right. Assume you're fucking up. Assume that you have your blind spots. Assume that you are biased. And if you do, then you'll look for it and you'll find it. One of the things that it took me too long to come to was to realize that I did have a Western-centric bias at Omenana, and that I was actually rejecting certain stories that just didn't fit, a particular way that I saw and read the world. I think one of the things that ever since, I'm no longer, editing, I no longer am editor there. And I've seen that the way that the stories have shifted, and the ways that the kinds of stories that I know I probably wouldn't have edited or wouldn't have published. And that speaks to a bias that I had. And, I'm not proud to say it, but it was there. And so, here at Anathema, there's a similar, self-policing that we have to do, because it took us, way more, editions to realize that we had not been publishing Black people, and we needed to make the effort to reach out and get more specific, Black voices. And Indigenous, we're still struggling to get more Indigenous voices. So we all have our blind spots. And I think as an editor of any hue, you need to assume that you're working from a blind spot, and then look to see it, and you'll find it.
Right. I really love that point about looking at yourself and just knowing that you have bias. And I feel like we don't want to feel like we're doing something wrong. And I think that holds a lot of people back. Thank you very much for your input and thoughts. Let me hit a couple of these questions real quick. Somebody asked, is there a list of BIPOC zines and mags anywhere? Anybody know of a list? I don't know of a comprehensive list.
I don't know about BIPOC zines and mags, but the African Speculative Fiction Society has a list of all African authored stories published across different magazines. So if the author is an African or an African identified person, they will show up in that database, and it's used to help us know who to nominate, and it's kind of like a database or repository, but it actually also acts as as an archive, so that you can go back and look and read people, and yeah.
Right.
That's
And I actually just added fantasy authors in there, so I know like if somebody's not in there, you can go in and put them in there too.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a great resource. And then somebody asked, is there something that you learned about how you approach editing that surprised you? Anyone want to tackle that real quick?
How skittish I was about rejection, I guess. Like I always knew like rejecting stories was a thing you had to do, but I just didn't realize how much anxiety it was going to give me doing it.
That's real. And then I'm going to upset Rashida by I'm going to keep going. What do you want more of? Are there any movements you're seeing in fiction right now that are really exciting you?
I want more stories where Black women are not always only kicking ass. Like, I want more stories where we get to be like delicate, and like, that people get to save us and like treat us like we're important, and like I love kick-ass women, but I would like to see more Black women who weren't just kick-ass, or who aren't even kicky ass at all, who are just like not necessarily damsels, but definitely given that like care and deference. Yeah, that so many white heroines get. I just want to see Black women get to be, three-dimensional. Yeah, like, so I want to see more Black women who are more than just the Dora Malaya, and who are more than just warriors. I want to see smart Black women. I want to see pretty Black women. I want to see like just a wide range of Black women doing things.
Nice. Anybody else want to jump on that real quick?
I'm
like
no.
I
was gonna say, I'm particularly partial to older Black women stories. And I'm not saying that just because I'm an older Black woman myself, but I will like read your story if there's an older Black woman. Just saying. Okay, go.
And I'm looking for not hot gay men to be the focus of things, because not every single gay guy that exists goes to the gym, and some of us eat crawlers, and I want to see that on the page, and I want them to have adventures, and I want them to be their own messy selves.
I was just ranting about that about gay shows, Netflix, Hulu, and how they all look too damn pretty. And I'm like, we all want to get some, not just the pretty people. Okay. Okay, last one. Do you prefer editing new writers or more well-established writers?
I'll answer. It depends on the person. I've had new writers who are just really, really convinced that their work is, gold. And if you so much as move a comma out of place, they'll be held to pay. And I've had, established writers who are like, oh, you want me to take out that entire character and destroy that whole structure? All right, I'll do it. And so, I just like I like working with people who it's clear that they value what I'm saying, and even if you don't take my advice, which it's not, you don't have to, I want to feel like you've heard me and you've considered it, and you're coming from a place where you've thought things through. And I think that too many authors generally start to believe their own hype. And that's, I think, the death of good writing. When you start thinking that you know what's what, and nobody else can tell you nothing, you're probably not doing your best work in that case. And so I like working with writers who still have an open mind and who still feel like they can benefit and get something valuable out of the editorial process.
Yeah, for sure. Feeling you big time right now. Fire crew, y'all want to jump on this one since I cut you out of the last one?
I was going to say, that being said, because I agree with everything you just said, there is nothing that makes me happier than seeing Brent retweet someone who's like, I just got my first story published. I'm so excited. Somebody loved this thing I created. This is the story I have been wanting to get out there. Like, there's just nothing like that feeling of knowing somebody felt validated and seen, and it's the first time they're getting to do it, and like hoping that it's not the last time.
Nice.
Yeah. Second that. I don't really have a preference. I feel like it is about the person. It is about their willingness to be edited and what they want to do with the story. So I don't think, unfortunately, experience can sour that, or it can improve it. So I don't think experience necessarily it matters in that equation. So
Nice. Well, thank you very much, panelists. This has been really amazing. Like, the people watching don't know, but we actually came on like 40 minutes early. We were all hanging out. We're having a good time. And then we started the panel and we're still hanging out. So genuinely enjoyed this panel. Genuinely wish we had like an hour or two more. I have more questions. So thank you, Clarion West, for putting this together, for hitting me up. I very much appreciate it. I appreciate being part of this, and I'm going to kick it back to Rashida.
Thanks, Arlie. And I could never be mad at you for extending an awesome panel like this just a few more minutes so that we could all get the benefit of these wise and wonderful words. So this is the conclusion of our series of editors panels for the spring. We'll be looking at doing some more fun stuff in the fall. But in addition to our 6-week workshop, Clarion West offers short online courses in the spring and the fall. Including classes like creating an immersive audiobook with Zelda K. Knight, who was one of our panelists on Sunday's panel. We offer a limited number of scholarships to each class for Black and Indigenous writers and writers from other marginalized backgrounds. Those are available on a first-come, first-served basis. And for more information about that, please check out our website. For more great advice and conversations on writing and editing, please check out the Pocket Workshop, now available from Hydra House, which is on their site on bookshop.org and wherever books are sold. It contains 24 instructors' advice essays, including work from Ursula K. Le Guin, Octavia Butler, and Vonda McIntyre. Thanks again to our co-sponsor, Seattle Public Library. Head to their website for more details on this and other exciting upcoming events. And thank you once again to our panelists, to our moderator, Arlie Sorg. It's been a pleasure having you here, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with all of us. We wish you all the best moving forward, and thank you for the work that you're doing. And good night. We'll see you the next time.